Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Who We Are podcast. I am so excited today to have a very special and unique guest with us. We have Ashish Kumar. Ashish, thank you so much for coming on the show and being with us today. For those of us who may not be as familiar with you, could you share with us a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Okay, well, I think most people would be familiar with me to the extent they are because of a Rice Media piece which came out, which basically pointed out that I was one of the top PSLE scorers back in the day when I was very young, and that at the age of 31, 32, I retired. So what happened is that I was working for the government. I was working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then in the Ministry of Communications and Information. And then I served out my bond because I was a government scholar, and then I essentially stopped seriously working after that.
Wow. Yeah. And before we get into that, I also want to ask you if you could take us back to your growing up years. What was life like growing up?
So I had a pretty conventional childhood, I would say, for a child born to a household of basically median income. So I went to a neighborhood school, Tachong Primary School.
Yeah.
Most of the things I was interested in school were not academic at all. The main thing I was into was actually basketball.
Wow.
I would skip lessons and CCAs to play basketball. I got kicked out of robotics club because I was skipping sessions to do basketball. Yeah. So through some genuinely crazy set of circumstances, no one still knows why, my school didn't really have a record of strong academic performance, Tachong. But that year, I think 4 of us ended up going to the raffle schools, when I think in all of its previous history, no one had ever been before. And then from then on, I would say my life took a fairly conventional path. It was just raffles, government scholarship, civil servant.
Yeah. And also, you have a younger sister, and growing up, were you guys very close? And also, what was the relationship like with your parents?
So my younger sister, I would say, fundamentally has the same kind of personality I do.
And how would you describe that?
I would say chaotic neutral. Yeah, I think neutral is probably the right term. The one difference I would say is that I'm a lot more nerdy than she is. So I think her chaotic vibe manifests itself through the fact that she's very social and enjoys social gatherings. I don't mind them, but I can also spend a week at home with books and I'm very happy. I always had a good relationship with my parents. They've always been very supportive. I don't think they ever expected me to do academically well. So after I got into raffles, I got the impression they
were not
took
that
their foot off
impressed?
No, I think I exceeded their expectations so much, they basically said, well, you can
You're
now
good
do
on
whatever
your
you
own,
want.
yeah.
So there was a huge
Wow.
switch from them being fairly concerned about what I was doing in my life. Yeah, to suddenly being like, okay, I mean, we
You're
didn't
all
expect
good.
you to do this, so just do whatever you want now. So that was very nice.
And how did you think, that parenting style and the way you grew up, or the way that you were brought up influenced your perspective and your way of thinking today?
Maybe it isn't even so much a question of parenting style as much as it was the circumstances within which I was brought up. So my parents, they actually met on a missionary ship called the Doulos, which sails around the world distributing essentially educational materials to underprivileged communities. And after I was born in Singapore, my parents went back on the ship and they took me with them. So I was stuck on essentially a floating library for 1-ish, 2-ish years.
Wow.
So I think when you're that young and you're stuck in a floating library, you rapidly learn that reading is basically the only
Outlet.
only outlet you have. So I think that was an insane stroke of luck. So from a very young age, I was a very avid reader. And I think no disrespect to my parents, but I think more than any decision they made about bringing me up, it was the circumstances which really shaped my life after that. In terms of my parents' attitudes, it's almost funny how stereotypical and conventional their attitudes are, in that my dad's not very academically focused. He's like, just let the boy do what he wants. My mum's much more of a stereotypical Chinese parent.
And she's a teacher herself.
And she's a teacher. In fact, she was a teacher at the primary school I went to. So people said that the only thing which explained my PSLE score was the fact that something dodgy must have happened. I'm fairly sure it didn't, but I would say also it's a two-way thing because obviously as you grow up you develop your own personality, and that's quite orthogonal to what your parents want you to do. And again, I want to say this with all the love in the world. There is a process of having to educate your parents about the kind of human being you are and having them respect that. And I think my parents do respect that. So this might be jumping a bit ahead, but when I told them I would be quote-unquote retiring, I think they took it reasonably well and knew not to press too much or offer too many thoughts on it, because this was a decision I had made and I'm owning it. So
Yeah.
I'm not terribly interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, wow.
I've done similarly reckless things before. I think about 2 years ago, I spent 10 days over Christmas in Ukraine in the middle of a war. I visited Kiev, Lviv, and Odessa. So I do this kind of stuff. And I think after a while, your parents realize this is
You've
just...
conditioned them to,
essentially. This is just the spawn we've produced. And he is just this way.
and you just got to learn to live with it.
Yeah,
No,
essentially.
but it's amazing. And also, you spent a few years in UK.
Yes, I did. I did my law degree in the UK. Yeah.
Well, tell us about that, and how do you think that shaped you and influenced you as well? Because I think those were also very formative years of your life.
Yeah, it had a huge influence, genuinely. First off, I guess I would say it's the conventional dream, right? Is to get a government scholarship, go to an overseas university.
Yeah.
But genuinely, the first feeling I got when I arrived at Cambridge and I stepped into my room and put my luggage on the floor was just an insane, crushing sense of, oh my God, I've screwed this up. Because you arrive in a new country, you realize you don't know anyone there. Everyone sounds different to you. You don't have any common cultural reference. You feel very lost and alone. And so genuinely, there was a period of about 2 days where I was like, I've just made a terrible, terrible mistake. I think what was lucky was that I was able to make friends very rapidly in Cambridge because I was very into competitive debating. I had been on the Singapore national team before I went overseas. And I would say that's unusual because many Singaporeans, when they study overseas, just end up hanging out with Singaporeans.
Yeah, I mean, it's normal, right? It's human
very
nature.
normal.
Yeah.
I don't say this in a judgmental way at all. It's the most natural thing in the world to talk to people who sound like you, who know your life,
Yeah.
with whom you can be comfortable. But because I was so obsessed with debating, I rapidly made friends in the debating circuit in the UK. And I would say those friendships which I made, I treasure now really, really strongly. Because whenever I travel overseas, the people I hang out with, the people whose weddings I go to, the people I end up hiking with, are all my debating friends I made from my time there. And I think, I chose to study law in the UK really just for fun. At no point I plan to be a lawyer because it just sounds like a heck of a lot of paperwork, to be honest. And I did it because I had done all the sciences in secondary school. Then I switched to a humanities student in JC, and I thought, let's do something which isn't either. But when I was in the UK, genuinely, I went for no law society events. I attended no law balls. I went for no job hunt things. And I think across 4 years, I probably attended less than 5 lectures. That just gave me a huge amount of free time.
Wow.
So I was traveling around Europe all the time. I was attending debate tournaments. I was reading books. And I think that was when the notion that I was not really built for work in the conventional sense started to really seep in. So that by the time I ended university, I was very sure the soonest possible opportunity I had to get out of this, I would. Yeah. I didn't tell everyone about it, of course, because at that age, if you tell everyone before you start work, you're planning to get out of work.
I know.
People think they think you're a bit delusional. Which
sure.
fair enough. What do you know about the world, right? But yeah, that never went away. So university had a huge influence on my whole vision of how life should work. Also, it's just meeting people with radically different life priorities and goals from yours, right? In Singapore, you get a government scholarship. Well, the older generation at least would be like, oh, this one's government scholar, this one's smart.
Yeah.
But you go overseas and no one gives a shit. As they should, right? Because, okay, you work for a government in a foreign country, whatever. My life goals are fundamentally different from yours. I want to develop generative AI. I had a friend who's working on generative AI. I want to be a billionaire by the time I'm 40. I want to be a humanitarian worker in Gaza. And I think just being exposed to people with that diversity of life pursuits kind of yanks you out of the Singaporean bubble pretty brutally, in a good way. So that also, I think, influenced the way I think about things.
Wow, amazing. And it sounds like it really expanded your whole perspective
Yeah, it really did.
and way of thinking. So when you came back after that, you had to serve your bond and you worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yeah. How did that time, also then shape your perspective on work and life?
So my working life can be divided into sort of 3 phases. The first phase was when I was in MFA HQ. It is a notoriously difficult first posting. It's a very uphill learning curve, very steep learning curve. So I would say that's where I suffered and paid for all the fun I would have later in the government. And then after I was in HQ for 2 years, I went to an overseas posting that was in Brunei, had a fantastic time because you have a lot more autonomy. You're really on the front lines in terms of finding out things, working for the government, doing things which only you in your position can do. So you really feel like you're making a difference, I think, when you're in an overseas posting. And then I had 2 years at MCI. Again, fantastic bosses, fantastic co-workers, amazing time. As an aside, I ended up at MFA because I made a mistake in my scholarship application. When I was in, there was a drop-down option on the website to choose which kind of scholarship you wanted. And I was looking for an open scholarship, which did not commit me to any particular ministry. Because why would you know at the age of 18 which ministry you want to work in? And I was looking for open, and I couldn't find open in the list of scholarship options. I saw admin, and I thought, well, admin, who wants to do admin? Admin sounds awful. So I couldn't find open. But I saw a list of ministries. So I said, well, okay, Foreign Affairs Ministry. I'll click on that one because traveling sounds fun. And I only realized my mistake when I got to the scholarship interview and the chairman of the PSE board stared me straight in the eye and said, yeah, so you picked an MFA scholarship instead of an open scholarship. That's quite unusual because this is a very difficult place to work. It's very demanding. And that is when, in the middle of the interview, I realized admin means open. Oh,
Who would have known?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how did you respond then? Did you
Well,
own it or did you just
well, what I said was, well, I've always enjoyed a challenge and I'm very sure about what I want to do in life, which is foreign affairs. So why go for the open when you're this certain? What's in my head? I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be a real moment in your life when you look back at it. Later on in the interview, I did have to come clean on something else. They asked me a question about, I think they said, well, okay, you say you're interested in international affairs. Tell me about the depreciation of the Japanese yen. And I remember replying along the lines of, well, I know the general effects of depreciation from A-level econs, but I don't know anything about Japan in specific. But can we talk about the Arab Spring instead? Because I'm quite interested in that. And fair enough to the interview board, they were like, okay, this boy wants to talk about the Arab Spring, let's chat with him about it.
Amazing.
So I just want to point out the whole process of me even ending up in MFA was a total coincidence. How did this change my view on what I wanted to do in life? To be honest, fundamentally, it didn't. My belief when I went to work was that I suspect this is not for me. And no matter how brutal or how rewarding my work was, it never changed the fact that I thought this was fundamentally not for me. In my last two, I've seen some things online which sort of position my story as if it's about burnout. This poor boy, he had to deal with all the burnout and the stress in Singapore's hustle culture. He needs to get out of it and find his freedom. I was not burnt out at all. I loved my last two postings. Genuinely, and I think I had a good time with my coworkers as well. But, when I eventually told my bosses at MCI that I would be leaving, then we had the standard conversation. They said, well, have you considered part-time work? Have you considered going on no-pay leave? Or we will find
like
places...
taking a sabbatical, just different forms of,
different ways of keeping you in the system, right? Basically giving you a bit more leash, but still keeping the leash. And I remember telling them, you are having an incentives conversation with me, but we should be having a values conversation. So unless you can convince me in the next half an hour that my entire vision of how life should be lived and what's valuable in it is wrong, you're not going to change my mind by offering me incentives. And because they are very wonderful, understanding people, I think they got it straight away. In fact, I think they were very supportive in their own way. So that's how work sort of changed my view. It didn't really. What it did do actually when I was in Brunei is that it gave me two new hobbies, which I am now quite seriously pursuing. One is hiking/mountaineering. The other one is badminton. We had a private badminton court in our diplomatic compound in Brunei. Started playing just to meet friends. And after I realized, actually, this is fun in and of itself.
Yeah.
Got back to Singapore, found a coach, and now I play fairly regularly.
Amazing. And going back to what you spoke about earlier on values, right? That you should be having a conversation on values with your manager then. How would you describe your values and what are they?
Probably it's one word, freedom or autonomy. One of those would be it. The problem with employment is not that your employer is good or bad. The problem with employment is that you have an employer at all. at the end of the day, the reason you wake up, the time you spend at work, the emails you send are all fundamentally subject to the discretion of someone else above you in some organizational hierarchy. And no matter how benign and forward-looking an organization is, or your boss is, and I've had fantastic bosses, at the end of the day, they do not have your interests at heart because they're employed by an organization. And even if they genuinely loved and cared for you the way your parents did, they still can't have your interests at heart because they are still not you. I mean, you are the only one experiencing your life from the inside and who can prioritize what matters in it. So at the end of the day, I think what it means just to be a human being and to be alive is to have to make hard decisions and to live by those decisions and know that really only you can be responsible for them, and that everything else which other people tell you, I think really you should not ignore, but heavily discount. And I think that's something which became clearer in my mind as well the longer I worked.
And it seems like a really extreme take on, pursuing freedom, which I'm sure actually, freedom is, for a lot of us, that's also one of our values in life. And I think, like what you did is inspiring also because like it is such a bold move, like an extreme move. How much of privilege do you think comes into play in this? And I ask this really in the most respectful sense. And like, how much of it does it come into play?
A huge amount. Huge amount. I mean, if you just take a step back from the Singapore context, to be even born in Singapore to begin with is an insane amount of privilege, right?
Absolutely.
The fact that I was in Singapore's meritocracy is far from perfect, but the fact that I could go from a neighborhood school to Raffles and then get a government scholarship and then go and study overseas, very, very few countries in the world give you this kind of pipeline if you work hard. So that in itself, in a global sense, is huge privilege. Stable family, huge privilege. And people often say that what I've done seems brave. I actually don't feel like it was brave. And the reason it's not brave, I think, is because my floor is very high. Things can't go that badly wrong for me. If everything really went wrong in my life right now, I could still get a job with the government fairly easily, right? Which means my living standards won't dip below a certain amount. The fact that I have a debating CV which I can use and monetize in terms of doing debate coaching or private lessons means that, again, I'm still able to feed and clothe myself fairly comfortably, right? I did a back of the envelope calculation. If I worked really, really, really hard right now and I basically unretired myself and turned myself into a full-time, hardcore private debate coach, I could probably make about 20 to 30K a month if I really, really put all my effort into it. And so the fact that I know that these options are even theoretically available, even if I don't avail myself of them, means that I don't need to feel brave at any point. Right? So
what you're trying to say is like the risk actually may not actually be that high.
No, the risk
to
is not
pursue
high.
this path of early retirement.
Yeah, for me in specific, I don't think the risk is high, which is why I have some friends I've spoken to and they have made, I think, the accurate observation that if they were in my position, they would do the same thing too. But the point is that the vast majority of people are not in my position, right?
Because sometimes we have other responsibilities like kids, family.
Exactly, right? I am an aromantic asexual. As far as I know, I do not have either sexual or romantic inclinations towards other people. A fact for which I'm immensely grateful. It simplifies life so much. My friends are falling in love, falling out of love, having children, BTOing, and having to undergo all of this stress, and I don't. So again, that's something totally unchosen and arbitrary, but which I regard myself as being very fortunate to have. So I think I'm immensely privileged. And I certainly would not recommend that people in positions very different from mine just do this on a whim.
Yeah. And a lot of us, we struggle with separating our identities from our careers. How did you manage to disconnect the two?
Yeah. Firstly, I really do think you're correct. That I think people allow their jobs to
define almost.
To define them. There's a healthy way of doing it and there's an unhealthy way of doing it where it kind of eats you up. And I think the unhealthy way of doing it is where your commitment is not really to the meaning of the job, but to the ancillaries. So for instance, if you're attracted to the money of the job, or the power of the job, or the prestige of the job, what you really do is that you put yourself on some awful hedonic treadmill where you're running all the time, you achieve something, And then you're either faced with the horrible emptiness of what do I do next, or you pick another goal and then pursue that. It's also very strange when you have a job, how even something very small can radically affect your mood. You know, I'm sure everyone has experienced this. Sometimes you've just got a small, tiny, trivial little thing to do. Maybe send an email. It will take you less than 10 minutes to write. But the fact that you know for the whole day that you will have to do it at some point means that you can't really enjoy anything over the course of the day. It keeps like eating at you, niggling in the back of your mind. And one of the best things about the state I'm in now is that that never happens to me. So even if I just do the same things I was doing, when I'm on holiday, I'm genuinely on holiday. Right?
You're talking about work trivial things.
Yeah, work trivial things.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I got to just schedule this meeting.
Or to follow up on something.
Follow up on something. You know, these small things can really eat you up. So how did I not let work define me? I think I'm quite obsessive. So the hobbies which I have, I always pursue fairly rigorously. And so even outside of work, I was spending a lot of time on all of these other things. And I think that really helped to... It just helped me remain grounded, in a sense, to what I valued. A random example of this. So I quite like classical music. And when I was in university, I just randomly started a classical music YouTube channel. It's not me playing. I upload and review performances. I just kind of kept going at it, and now it has about 160,000 subscribers. But I did it purely as a by-the-way thing. And I think having these things going on, which were not work, really helped. It also helped that I had very flexible bosses who gave me a lot of free time. And who, I think, as long as I produced work of reasonably good quality and was in the inboxes on time, basically said, just let Ashish away in a corner somewhere. Right?
You become a verb, yeah.
Yeah. You take time to build up, I think, credibility in an institution.
For sure.
And then when people recognize that you are competent, then they can
And you're
respect your working
consistent.
style.
Yeah.
So for instance, people know that I'm not a morning person at all. So I know my DD, my deputy director, used to joke, don't bother sending anything to Ashish before 2 p.m. He's probably sleeping or something, you know. But they didn't mean that in a mean way.
Of course.
I think it was just, that's just how he rolls, and he gets stuff done, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then on the flip side then, you know, if we don't, I mean, the goal is not to let our work and career define us. Then what defines you, Ashish? What do you think defines you?
I think maybe it's two things, and they're kind of linked. And I think that they're linked to what I want to do in life. I think I want to experience beauty, and I would like to create some.
Beautiful. Tell me more.
You know, in terms of experiencing beauty, so I love art and music, visual art, cinema, everything. The problem is that nowadays it's very easy to access all of the human-made beauty in the world. I can do it while on a train ride. There are some train rides I take which are like 15 minutes long, but I don't even feel the time because I'm listening to such a fantastic recording. So the kind of beauty I now go out of my way to pursue is not human-made beauty. It's natural beauty. Of which, unfortunately, we are really quite bereft in Singapore. Hence all the travel, right? So that's a big thing I want to do. I want to experience beautiful things.
It's almost like being in awe.
Yeah,
And
correct.
that's such an important...
I mean, look, the world is insanely huge and life is insanely short. It's strange to me that people are not more desperate to go out and experience more of it. You know, it's 193 countries in the world. If you were to live for 4 years in each of them, 5 years in each of them, which is the amount of time it takes to really know each country well, you'd have to live 1,000 years. And yet at this point, I only have, 60 left? Like the gap between the amount of world there is to actually experience and the time you have to experience it in is pretty shocking if you think about it. That's the first thing. The second thing about creating beauty is that, well, I just like making stuff. I really like the notion that of creating stuff which outlasts you. So another one of the strange coincidental things which kind of happened in my life is in 2019, I submitted a short story, a piece of fiction to the Golden Point Award. It's a story I'd mostly written on the train when I was en route to work. And just again it was just luck, essentially. I ended up winning the competition. And so that's when I started thinking, this was really enjoyable. I should write more and try and publish a bit more. So that's one of the things I want to do now.
Wow.
I took up composing a bit in university as well, music.
Yeah.
It's like 1 or 2 videos on my channel, which are my own compositions. And then I deleted a whole bunch of them because I was like, this isn't very good. So I like to do some of that as well. And I'm not really interested in achieving anything like commercial success or fame or having a wide audience. As long as 1 or 2 people like it, I'm quite happy.
And it's interesting because, like, I think what's going through my mind, it is amazing how you also have that time and space to be able to pursue and explore all of this. And you think that, it is not something that you're able to do without, I mean, if you had a job, it's really all or nothing.
Yeah. No, it's true because I told myself, while I had a job, I would still continue doing these things. But it's very hard. You just don't have the emotional bandwidth. I mean, maybe someone with more resilience or energy than me can do it. But you get back after a day at work and you tell yourself, okay, I will now, different people tell themselves different things. I'll go for a jog. I will spend time with my family.
Yeah.
I will write. I will play
Yes.
some music. I think the vast majority of people don't. I think they tell themselves they'll do that, but it's very difficult when you're that drained just from work. And when your mind is all these reeling from all of these responsibilities, you just don't have the bandwidth. So to give you an illustration of this, I have a little badminton WhatsApp group with a bunch of maybe 60 people in it. We all go
Wow.
play badminton every Monday. Not all of us turn up, obviously. It's just, but it's, sometimes, and a bunch of these people are civil servants, when they rotate from one job to another, suddenly some of them will just disappear entirely from
For a
the group.
season.
For a season or for a year or for 3 years. Because something about their job means that they now cannot spare 2 hours out of the, 196 hours a week to come and play badminton? And if you think about it, that's kind of terrifying. I don't begrudge them at all because they have difficult jobs. But 8 to 10 p.m. on a Monday, and then they're like, oh no, I just can't do that with my job right now. I think there's something really tragic about that. No, I mean, not just tragic, actually terrifying about that. That you don't even have that limited freedom to do even small things like that. So yeah.
Back to being beholden to
Yeah.
our jobs, yeah. You mentioned in the Rise interview that you did that you find it terrifying to wait until you're 60 to give yourself permission to be free.
Yeah.
How do you think society's perception of retirement impacts us and our decisions when it comes to, work and life?
I think people are terrified of social judgment.
Yeah.
One of the funniest things about that Rice article was just watching the sheer diversity of responses to it. There's a bunch of people who are like, this guy must be born into wealth, right? And I think that's a reasonable assumption to make because the Rice article didn't go into a lot of detail about my finances and stuff like that, which is totally fair. So lots of people say, this guy just comes from privilege, so he's just tang ping.
They
He's
assumed and yeah.
Yeah, correct. He's just slacking off. Fair enough. So that was one set of responses. Another bunch of people said, I'd love to do this, but I can't. And then people started asking me for financial advice, which you really shouldn't. I was like, geez, what's going on? Oh, what do you invest in? Should I invest in this ETF
That
or that
allows
ETF?
you to have such...
I'm like, yeah, look, all I know about finances is do not trust your own ability to time the market or to objectively assess the value of a company. And once you understand how genuinely stupid you are, you will make sound financial decisions. Any financial decision premised on your own intelligence and capacity will almost certainly go catastrophically wrong. Unless, of course, you're like a Warren Buffett and you do all that hard work. And then there was a whole category of what surprised me was how much older folks really got into this stuff. A lot of the groups
And when you say older, how old are you referring
50
to?
and above.
Okay.
50 and above.
Okay.
Everyone was sharing it in WhatsApp groups. My friends and coworkers were like, my parents got this in a group.
Wow.
My badminton friends were like, in my other badminton group, people are sharing this. And I think there was a mixture of the younger generation, strawberry generation. These people can't work, back in my day.
Yeah.
Some people saying, no, in 5 years, I bet he'll come crawling back to the government for work. And I think, and I think there were some people who asked me, are you okay with all of these reactions? Are you not worried? Now, I'm totally fine with it because I'm not really affected by this kind of stuff. I found it very interesting. But I can see that for many other people, just having all of these reactions directed your way could be really psychologically quite distressing.
Yes.
I think part of it is, and I don't want to sound judgmental, but I think part of it is essentially a kind of sour grapes, right? I mean, people don't want to believe that something like this is doable without there being something dodgy going on somewhere, right? And actually, there is something dodgy going on somewhere in the sense that I can still make a living through debate coaching. That's the dodgy thing going on, as it were. But I think part of it's also just the fact that we're very acculturated to think that your value depends on your capacity to suffer and your ability to contribute to society. I'm a bit skeptical of this argument because there are many jobs people work which don't actually contribute to society meaningfully, but we're okay with. The vast majority of consultants, for instance, to be honest, don't perform any really valuable social function. If you look at the PowerPoint decks they charge millions for, they're saying by and large trivial things, which any middle manager at any company would know. But we don't direct these questions at them, for instance, or people selling risky financial products like mortgage-backed securities. Probably they're a net social ill, but we don't question them because there's a certain amount of prestige attached to the money and the position. So I'm a bit skeptical of that argument as well. But I mean, just to answer your question head on, yeah, I think social expectations can be a real dampener for certain people. And my only piece of advice would be, don't worry about it. These things are a flash in the pan. People will talk about it for 1 week, 2 weeks. You're going to live for another 60 years. So, don't sweat it, is what I would say.
Wow. And, based on also your background, do you think that systemic changes that are needed to create more flexibility for, different career paths or even early retirement plans?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think in this regard, I think Singapore is moving in a very good direction. I think we have actually started to, look, I'm fairly skeptical at the best of times of government policy and messaging. But I do think that when the government says we do want to create different definitions of success, we do want people to have more flexibility, we want people to have more time to spend with their kids, with their families, I do think they actually mean it. In part because it's now an existential issue for Singapore because of our birth rate.
Yeah.
Right? So for instance, when I was growing up, I remember people talking about ITE in fairly derogatory terms. Right? Remember 小孩不笨?
Yes.
ITE means it's the end.
Yeah.
Right? Now, actually, I think that's by and large disappeared. And I think people
have reframed it.
Have totally reframed it. IT has got like a fantastic, amazing campus, world class by any measure, and we do lots of good things to help people out and to give them opportunities. I think in the workplace, the government itself is really taking the lead on a bunch of good policies. So again, the fact that to be perfectly honest, there was some periods at work where I basically didn't appear in the office for like 2 weeks at a time.
With no good reason?
I didn't give anyone any reason. No, I didn't say why I wasn't in the office, but stuff got done and I still got along perfectly fine with my workers and my bosses were happy with me because they recognize that formalism is not what makes work meaningful, especially for younger people. It's not the needing to show up or leaving the office first or being around at the most meetings. It's the actual quality of your work and your commitment to the value it creates for society. And I think genuinely it's quite impressive how at least certain sectors of the civil service are really quite open-minded and forward-looking about this. In fact, they will say things like, yeah, if you want to leave the government, absolutely go ahead, but please retain some connections with us. So in the future, if you want to come back and work for us, we'd love to have you on. We'd love people with private sector experience. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Are we moving fast enough? Probably not. I think we can still afford to do a bit more on that front. I know our friends in the private sector who are still working pretty brutal hours, which we do not need to actually, and when there's still a lot of toxic bosses. I think these things take time to change, and we can probably change them faster. But I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and that's really encouraging to hear. Considering also your significant contributions to Singapore's system and the ongoing leadership renewal, how do you weigh your sense of duty to your country and community against, of course, your pursuit for freedom and happiness?
Yeah. So, I've never, my entire life, been able to feel loyalty towards big things. I find it very hard to feel loyalty towards country because, I don't know the vast majority of Singaporeans. They are strangers to me. They're about as strange to me as a random person living in France, right? Because my path as a Singaporean is very weird compared to most other Singaporeans, right? And there are definitely people in the US and UK I would probably have more cultural similarity with since I'm so anglicized compared to, let's say, an uncle sitting in a kopitiam, right? I've never really felt a deep sense of loyalty towards my schools, for instance, my alma mater, or indeed my ministries. Because again, I know the vast majority of people here. So I've never really been loyal to big institutions. I can much more easily relate to the notion of being loyal to my friends, people I actually know, Or on the other extreme, humanity as a whole. Am I making the world in some sense a better place?
Maybe going back a little bit also to early retirement. What do you think, Ashish, are some misconceptions that people might have when it comes to early retirement?
Oh, I think the biggest misconception is that you'll just be bored. I think it depends on your personality. But I find myself actually more busy now, more engaged now, almost than I was when I was working. Because you fill your time with all of these things you want to do, right? If you want to play a musical instrument well, if you want to do creative writing, if you want to run a YouTube channel, if you want to pick up some technical mountaineering skills, if you want to get good at a sport, these things take up a lot of time. And doing all of these at once takes up most of your week already. I would work an average of, say, 10 hours a week, and that probably is slightly more than I'd like to, because it's actually these 10 hours are actually, in a meaningful way, taking away time from other things I would like to do. So I think that's the biggest misconception. I think maybe it's just a personality thing. I think maybe most people are not like me in that sense. Because maybe people are not quite as obsessive as I am. So maybe other people would genuinely be bored. So I've actually spoken to my friends about this. I've asked them, well, if you retired, what would you do? And they've kind of said, well, I don't really know. I just hang out, I guess.
It's not something that one actively thinks about, or
but
plans
also,
for.
what surprised me is that they didn't have an immediate answer.
Got it.
I think up till the age of about 23, 24, I always assumed that everyone else had a secret life, which was the real life they wanted to lead. So that I assumed that if you ask most people, well, if you didn't have to work, what would you do? I thought everyone would be like, oh, I would love to be
a whole list of things that they have.
I would love to be, I don't know, professional chef. I'd love to start a podcast, YouTube channel. I'd love to start a travel blog or something.
Just basically pursuing some passions and hobbies.
I assumed there was something they wanted to do, and then they had to give that up for pragmatic reasons.
Yeah.
And then I realized for the vast majority of people, that's not actually the case. The vast majority of people don't have a secret alternate life they wish they led. They're just quite happy with this one. So maybe that's why people ask me so often, when you be bored? It's because it's coming from a place where they don't have...
Where they can't imagine otherwise.
Yeah, correct.
So back to your parents a little bit. They're both still actively working?
Yes, they're still working.
And they're in their 60s?
Essentially 70s now. Yeah, I think I was born when my parents were in their mid-30s.
Okay.
So I think my mum's actually past 70, my dad's basically almost there.
A teacher. She's still teaching.
Yeah. I think she really quite enjoys it. She gets very emotionally, I think, invested in like the academic success of her students.
It's amazing.
Which is, I think, what you really need to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Because the hours are
it's
long.
also what you really need. Would you say it's really also what you really need for your career?
Yes. Yeah, you have to care about the meaning of it. Because I think anything else is fundamentally unfulfilling. Anything else you care about on your job apart from the meaning of it is always going to just make you want more. If you care about, again, prestige, you can always have a more prestigious position. If you care about money, you can always have more money. Meaning, I think, is the one which actually you can satisfy. If you believe you're doing good work full stop, then I don't think that creates that sense of needing more or wanting more, that kind of aching, which I think a lot of people have when they work. So I think that's the most important thing. That's the most emotionally sustainable way, I think, to live a life if you do want to work.
And a fulfilling life also in that sense.
Correct. So that, many people, I think, reach the end of their lives and they look back at the detritus of what they have left behind them and they kind of go, well, what really was the point of all of that? And very few people actually think at the end of their life, oh, I should have worked harder. I should have fought more for that promotion. I shouldn't have let that person step over me on the way up the corporate ladder. I think many people will think to themselves, I wish I spent more time with my family or developing myself or contributing to the world. And I think you should be thinking about your life, and this sounds slightly bizarre, you should be thinking about your life as if you're already at the end of it while knowing you're not at the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
There's a really nice quote from Kierkegaard I like. It's not an exact quote, it's a paraphrase of something more complicated he said. But it basically goes, life has to be lived forward, but understood backward.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's not 100% true. It's possible to live life forward, but with an eye to how it will look in the rearview mirror.
Wow.
So always live life while asking yourself, well, how will this look in the rearview mirror?
Wow.
Right? Because I think that actually will change your outlook quite fundamentally, I think, for most people.
And it's really about living life with the end in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, think about the shape of your life.
Yeah.
Not just the moment to moment. There's a funny little thought experiment I came across was on in university. It was actually a philosophy course, philosophy paper. But basically said, suppose the only thing we cared about in life was the amount of happiness in it, which I probably agree with in some sense. But let's imagine two lives with the same amount of happiness, but one life starts in abject misery and ends in satisfaction. So the graph kind of goes like this, it tilts upward. And another life with the same amount of happiness, which is the opposite. It starts out very, very happy, but ends in abject misery. I mean, which life would most people prefer? I think almost everyone, I think, would prefer a life which starts difficult but ends well. And I think the point the author of that thought experiment was trying to show is that we care about the shape of a life, not just the stuff inside of it. We care about the trajectory of it. And I think people should spend time thinking quite consciously about the shape their life is taking.
Wow.
Yeah.
With your decisions that you've made for your life and the trajectory that your life is going towards, on your deathbed, what do you think, you would say to yourself?
Well, I hope to be able to say two things to myself. I think the first one, which I suppose is just a basic requirement, is I did no harm. If I did not,
it was, yeah.
yeah, I did not make the world a net a worse place. The second thing I would like to be able to say to myself is I had a decent time. Right? I achieved some of the things I wanted to do. I left behind some beautiful things which people appreciate. And I spent time with friends who cared for me. And that's basically it. I cannot imagine anything else outside those two things which would ever matter to me.
What has been the most surprising or unexpected aspect since you left? Or what is something that you discovered about yourself that maybe you didn't? It was surprising.
That's a very good question. Oh, I hope it doesn't sound too lame, but genuinely the thing which has surprised me is I always thought that retirement would be very fun. It has turned out to be even more fun than I thought it would be. I know this sounds like super hedonistic.
That.
No, genuinely. And it's because you know how there are many things you do in life which are happy only in hindsight? Like you go on a trip and you think, oh, actually that was good. It felt
It
satisfying.
surpassed my
I want to do that again.
expectations.
Yeah. What surprised me that after I retired, you stop just enjoying things in retrospect. It's much easier to enjoy things in the moment. For instance, I recently came back from New York. I met a couple of my YouTube subscribers in New York, just hung out with them, went to a couple of concerts, did a big hike, went to view the total solar eclipse in the Finger Lakes region.
Amazing.
And I was surprised while I was doing all this stuff, how much I was telling myself, I'm actually loving this like right now. I'm surprised at how conscious I am of the fact that I am happy right now. It's not like you do a hike, you come back at the end of the day and I was like, yeah, that was good. I felt like I spent my day productively. It's not that kind of happiness. It's a very present, immediate happiness. And I'm surprised by how much of that I was able to have after I retired. And I think it's because of what I talked about earlier.
Yes.
Which is when there's nothing
At
waiting
the back
for
on
you.
your mind, yes.
I think that's actually it.
Wow.
The other thing I learned about myself, I suppose, is that maybe I'm just slow to realize this. It's much easier to be kind to people and to be social when you are happy. There are some people in the world who are capable, while they're suffering and miserable, of being kind to other people. I think the vast majority of us are not that good. But I think when you have a certain amount of space for yourself, it's much easier to accommodate other people's interests. Right? It's small things. You come back from work, you're in a bad mood, you snap at someone because of something
it overflows.
incredibly small.
Whatever is inside would overflow.
It overflows, and you take it out on other people in a way which is very negative. So that's the other thing which I think surprised me as well.
What is one advice that you would give to your younger self at the beginning of your career? And how do you think it would have influenced your trajectory?
Oh, it's a very good question. To be honest, many of the decisions I took in a fairly uninformed way, even now, with the benefit of retrospect, I would still make the same decisions. I would still take up the MFA scholarship. I'll still take up the scholarship. Because I think it just turned out very well. The one thing I really tell myself when I start work is please exercise. No, because you see, I think the thing about many people, especially people in Singapore's education system, people who are told they're elite and smart, is that you are told that you are your brain, and what makes you you, what makes you valuable, is the stuff which happens in the squishy grey bit up there. And I think because of that, in a weird way, you're very disconnected from the fact that you're an embodied creature and that your body has to work and it feels pleasurable to use your body to achieve things and to develop skills.
To push boundaries. Yeah.
To suffer a bit.
Yeah.
And that feels really good. And I think very often people forget that that's a big part of what it means to be alive and be happy. And I didn't exercise throughout the course. In fact, for the moment life primary school, I basically didn't exercise until I did my overseas posting in Brunei. So for a period of about a decade-ish, I did no exercise at all. That was such a wasted opportunity. Because now that I'm retired, I want to do all these physical things. I wish I was fitter. I wish I developed these skills.
And you think that really ties in with like fulfillment, self-esteem, building of our self-esteem and everything.
Look, human beings are just animals. We are still influenced by chemicals in our body and what goes on in it. If you exercise regularly, if you try and have a reasonable sleep schedule, even though I'm very bad at doing that, you will just be much happier. You will wake up in the morning feeling better. You will have a clearer mind. You will feel more capable of doing things in the day you need to do. And it's such an unsmart thing to say, but it's also one of, I think, the profoundest things I've realized. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ashish, I'm still curious if you could distill one key lesson or one piece of wisdom from your experiences so far, what would it be?
Sort out your values first. I think very often when people trying to figure out what to do in life, they're imbibing social messages or they are trolling Reddit for financial advice or life advice, so on and so forth. I think all of those are really second order considerations. I think once you figure out what you want in life and what you're willing to sacrifice for it, I think life simplifies itself a lot. I'm not saying that life makes it easy because realizing what you want might also demand some really difficult sacrifices from you. But you will only have the ability to make those sacrifices in a way which gives you control, which gives you meaning, if you know what you actually care about and who you care about in life. That takes time. You probably don't know at the age of 18, I think.
And it might evolve.
So you have to be open to that.
Constantly,
So you can't be fanatically committed to your values as well. You must have some level of commitment because if you don't commit to your values, then you have no values. But you must always allow yourself the contingency that you are not a fixed person. You're not a fixed thing in the world like a rock, right? That you change. So while we're allowing yourself to be open to that, you should still pursue what you want to pursue very, very seriously. So I think that's probably the one thing I tell people. Like, figure out what you care about, right? And then once you know what you care about, what to do becomes much clearer. It doesn't become easier, it becomes clearer.
And my last question is, if you were to write a book on your life, what would the title of your autobiography be?
Ooh, it's a good one. Oh, maybe it would be something like Might As Well. Because I think that's my attitude towards, well, since I'm alive, since I'm here, I might as well do all these things, right? And I'm not trying to be too fanatical about it. I don't tell myself I need to climb Mount Everest, otherwise my life is a failure. I need to publish 5 books. But it's just enjoying the fact that you're alive, you're in the world, opportunities are open to you, and you can explore them. So I think Might As Well would be a good title for the autobiography.
Yeah. Well, Ashish, thank you so much for your time and for sharing so openly as well. I really enjoyed this conversation. And, for those of us who maybe, want to be connected to you or have a chat with you about anything, where can we find you and where can we follow you?
So I have a YouTube channel. It is literally my full name, for better or for worse. So it's Ashish Kumar. And there's an email there on my channel page. So if you want to ping me, that's probably the easiest way.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. It was a pleasure.